Hey guys, it's James from The Dog's Way. I'm here with Charlie. It's a warm, sunny February morning, and today we're going to be going over lead work placement principles and how to stop your dog pulling when they're on a walk. Okay guys, so one of the number one queries that I get from clients, and I think one of the biggest issues that people face with their dogs, is how to stop their dogs pulling on a walk. And what I tend to find is that we spend a lot of time talking about the reasons why dogs pull. So things like if your dog's excited or your dog's fearful or your dog is trying to get somewhere. But one of the things that often gets missed is what we'd call lead placement. And this is the idea of what tools you use and how they can have a dramatic impact on the likelihood of your dog pulling. So what I want to do in this video is just go through the scale of different tools that you can use with your dog, how that's going to impact how much strength you have, how much control you have of your dog, and how likely they are to start pulling. Okay guys, so one of the most popular tools that I see people using when they're walking a dog is a harness. This harness that I've got on Charlie here, this is the one that he wears when he's in the car. But when I'm teaching dogs to walk nicely on a lead, the harness is going to be the first thing that I get rid of. Now, when we look at lead placement, the way that we would describe a harness is that it sits at the lowest point on the body so that it maximizes a dog's strength. If I just turn Charlie on his side here, just so that I can show you. When we look at where we can place a lead, you can see that the attachment of the lead here is right in the center of his back. Now, when it comes to where we place the lead, I can place a lead from any point here, all the way up his back, up his neck, right to the tip of his nose. Hello. And what you find is that the lower down the back you go, the more strength your dog has, because the tool is connecting to all of the muscles of the legs, which are the biggest, most powerful muscles on the body. When we look at when we want to maximize a dog's strength, or we want to encourage a dog to pull, the harness is going to be the tool that we want to use. The other thing about harnesses, which is really important to understand, is that when a dog moves forwards, the place that they feel the pressure is right at the front of the chest. Now what that means is if they move forward and they feel pressure, they learn very quickly to drive themselves into it. And dogs have a tension reflex response where the more they feel that pressure, the more they're just going to drive, go, go, go. So what you often find is that people go to a harness because they find that their dog is on a normal collar, their dog is choking, their dog is pulling. So what they want to do is remove the pressure from the neck. Now, whilst the harness does this, it actually encourages more strength, more pulling. So it doesn't create a behavioural resolution, it just creates a temporary practical resolution to the pressure on the front of the neck. Okay, so the next place that you would see very commonly that somebody has a lead is with a flat collar, which you can see, I don't know if you can see under Charlie's fur he's wearing there. So what we find with a flat collar is that it sits very, very low down on the neck. So it sits on the shoulders. Now this is quite similar to the way that a harness works in that it puts the pressure again at the front of the chest, which means it creates this same scenario where if Charlie wants to move forward and he feels pressure at the front of the chest, he's going to drive himself into it. It's the same pattern that you see with the harness, where if he puts pressure forwards, he feels that pressure, he drives himself into it, and he finds that he can get somewhere, he's going to keep driving, pulling. It doesn't actually matter whether his Charlie is calm, excited, nervous or not. If he feels that pressure, that reflex response is, I feel it, I drive into it, so this is going to cause a lot of pulling. Now, for most dogs, a collar low on the neck is not going to be the place where they're going to choke. They are still going to make a lot of huffing and pulling sounds, and they can do themselves a lot of damage, but this tends to be a place where we'd say that they are very strong. Now, you can arguably move the lead higher up to the middle of the neck, and this is actually the most dangerous point where you would put a lead. So this is where they can do themselves real harm. This is where they can choke themselves because they don't have the strength of their shoulders and their front shoulder muscles and chest muscles. They're just using their necks. Again, they can feel that tension on the neck. They're going to drive themselves into it. They're going to pull. There are other tools that you can use, which again can be fantastic if they're used by the right person or they're put at the right point on the body. But often because the lead placement is wrong, they're certainly not going to do you any favours and they may actually cause more problems. Now, with a lot of the dogs that I work with, I will use a slip lead. You'll often find that when people use a slip lead, they'll put it, again, very low down on the chest, down on the neck here. And again, when we look at this scale from the back of the body to the tip of the nose, you can see because the lead is very low down, lots of strength, lots of power, lots of pulling. There are a lot of trainers that actually don't use slip leads at all because of this overriding principle of the idea of where you put the lead. So the thing that I hear very often, what people will say is, well, the idea of a slip lead is that you put it low on a dog's chest, you let them go forwards, if they pull they'll choke themselves and then they'll stop. And I always say to my clients, every part of that sentence is wrong, because you shouldn't put it low down on the chest, you shouldn't let them pull, and you shouldn't let them choke yourselves. So I certainly understand some of the concerns that people have about the lead, but for me the key to it is placement. Now what I'm going to do here is just show you some of the better places that we can put a lead, which make a significant difference for your dog. Now rather than having the lead low or in the middle of the neck, what we want to do is we want to put the lead nice and high. So if I just lift up Charlie's chin here, can you see that I'm putting the lead right under his jaw? So what I'm doing is I'm taking the lead off the neck, I'm taking the lead off the chest so that there's no pressure at this part of the body. The higher up we move the lead, the more we negate a dog's strength and the more we increase our ability to communicate with the dog. Now what I mean by that is you can see when we look at where the lead is compared to his nose, his eyes and his ears, his communication centres, it's much closer. So I can remove the pressure, remove the strength, put the lead at a point of sensitivity where he can feel much more easily, so it's much easier for me to tell him where I want him to go or what I want him to do. So depending on the dog that you have, different dogs, different ages, different energy levels, you will find that a lot of dogs, just moving the lead high up to the top of the head and making sure that your lead placement is correct, it makes a significant difference to your dog's ability to pull. Removing the pressure from the front of the chest takes away that need to drive themselves forward. However, there are some dogs that are very strong, very high energy, and even if you have a lead like a slip lead that is at the top of the neck, you will find that that lead slides down and then they can do themselves some damage. Now obviously, as I said before, that's not something that we want and we have to be able to negate that. So that's when we look at, okay, how can we move the lead even higher, or how can we keep the lead at the top of the head regardless of how high our dog's energy level is, regardless of how much they want to try and put their head down and drive forwards, regardless of how strong they are. Now, there are a couple of different solutions to this. What I always say to people is that the closer to the nose you go, the more sensitivity you are creating, the more strength you're taking away from the dog, the more control you have over the dog, which also means the more trust your dog has to have in you. Up until this point, if you're using a slip lead, a flat collar or a harness, there's very little need to condition a dog to the tool because they have the majority of their strength and the majority of their ability to communicate. What I mean by that is if they decide that they want to go somewhere, they can probably go if they want to. However, these next tools need more conditioning, and that may be where you need to bring in a trainer that can help you condition a dog to these tools. The first one that I want to have a look at is what's called a figure 8 lead. You also get leads called gentle leaders. And the way that they work, if I take this slip lead here, what we do is we take it as large as we can, we twist it into a figure 8 and pop it over the dog's nose. Now, you can see here that because the lead comes over the dog's nose, a couple of things happen. The first thing is that rather than the lead being around the neck, because it crosses over under a dog's chin, there's absolutely zero contact with the neck. The other thing is that because the lead goes over the dog's muzzle, and I mean muzzle in terms of the front of their face, this section here, this actually stops the lead from sliding down the neck. And you'll notice that our point of contact and our point of control, if I just spin Charlie round here, is at the back of the head. If Charlie will, you're going to settle there? Oh, there you go, perfect. So you can see it's right at the back of the head there. Now what you'll find is that you can get a tool called a gentle leader, which is almost identical to a figure 8 style of a slip lead. And that is where the connection point, rather than being at the back of the head, is at the chin. This can work with larger dogs if their head is much higher, because if your hand is next to your dog's head, then often you'll find having the connection on the chin is a more comfortable place for you and the dog than having the connection at the top of the head here. What you can also do, I'll just take this lead off Charlie, is you can use a tool called a head halter. And what you can see here, if I just lift Charlie's chin up, can you see that our point of control when we use a head halter is right under his chin, right under his mouth. Now, what I always say to people when it comes to choosing a tool that fits around the head is you have to get a balance between how much strength you negate and how much control you take away from the dog versus the amount of trust that they have, the amount of sensitivity that they have, and the likelihood of them reacting. With a head halter, it does give you some advantages in that it really does take away all of a dog's strength. However, what I tend to find with head halters, certainly as opposed to a gentle leader or a figure 8 lead, is that because it controls the dog right from the point of the front of the face, it can actually overwhelm them. If you move the lead in any direction, you'll see a lot of their kind of thrashing their heads around, because it really does move their head from side to side. So you have to be incredibly gentle with these tools, and you have to make sure that your dog is comfortable with it and conditioned to it. You can see Charlie's relatively happy to have the lead on. At the end of the day, for him, it's not something that he normally wears, so he's kind of a little bit like, I'm not really sure what's going on here. But you will find that if you just put one of these leads on your dog and then try to start walking them with it, they're going to do a lot of pawing, a lot of fussing. I think Charlie might be doing a little bit of that now. They're really not going to be a massive fan of the amount of control you're taking away, which means that you have to take the time to get them used to the tool, and you have to make sure that they understand that they're not supposed to take that off their nose. This applies to halters, it applies to gentle leaders, it applies to figure 8 leads. Okay, so you really have to take the time to condition your dog to it. There are two other factors that we have to take into account when it comes to our lead placement. There are some dogs that are very high energy, there are some dogs that are very anxious, and so even if you've got your lead placement right, that's when you find out that those dogs are still going to want to drive themselves forward. Now, when it comes to the figure 8 or when it comes to the halter, one of the advantages, particularly for dogs that are very sight oriented, so this can be dogs that have a very high prey drive, sight hounds, dogs like collies, shepherds, things like that. Because the lead goes over the nose, it can also act as a bit of a distraction and a different sensation to take them away from using their eyes so much. But what you can also see here is that at the moment I've got Charlie on what's called a weighted jacket. Now, the way that a weighted jacket works is twofold. Partly it helps to drain the dog's energy, and partly it gives them an additional sensation and an additional purpose when they're out on a walk. So if you find that you've already got your dog on something like a figure 8, a head halter, a gentle leader, and you find that your dog is still pulling, something like a weighted jacket or a backpack for your dog can be a really good idea. What we find is that if you have a dog that is really high energy and wants to do more than just walk, giving them an activity to do like carrying a little bit of extra weight means that they've got something else to occupy their brain. The weight is not actually the important thing. Generally, you want it to be a maximum of 10% of your dog's body weight. You generally start around 2 to 5%. It's just the sensation of carrying something extra and having an additional purpose that can be useful for your dog. Sometimes what we also do, particularly with certain retrieving breeds, is we can give them something to carry in their mouths as well. Now, we have to be careful if we're doing something like asking their dog to carry something in their mouths, because we don't want to develop a need or obsessive behaviour or possessive behaviour, but it depends on the type of dog you have as to what works best for them. A lot of my clients that have very, very high energy, very high intensity dogs, we look at the right lead work, we look at the right lead placement, and then we look at fulfilling purpose as well. Okay guys, so just a quick reminder, just to finish up. So first of all, we have a scale in terms of where we can put the lead. We have the very base of the back, where the dog is strongest, where they have the access to their largest muscles, their back leg muscles, where they're going to drive themselves forwards. And we can take a lead and we can put it at any point from the center of the back, all the way up the neck, the back of the head, and down to the front of the nose. The higher up the lead we go, the more strength we take away, the more we increase the sensitivity of the lead, the more we move the lead to the communication centers of the brain, okay? So lead placement makes a big, big difference in terms of the amount of strength your dog has and the likelihood that they're going to pull. Second point for you to remember is that if your dog has pressure at the front of the chest, regardless of how excited they are, regardless of how calm they may be, regardless of whether they're nervous, it really doesn't matter. If they can feel that pressure at the front of the chest and they have learnt to drive themselves into it, the calmest dog in the world is still going to pull you forward, okay? So when it comes to lead placement, taking the lead off the front of the chest has a massive impact on the likelihood that your dog is going to pull. Third point for you guys, when it comes to those high energy dogs, just remember that having the lead over the eyes, so taking that attention away from the eye contact, acting as a little bit of a distraction there, is a really valuable thing. And also giving your job an additional purpose, whether that's something like a backpack or a weighted jacket up to about 10% of your dog's body weight, all right, or even doing something like carrying in their mouth, gives them additional job, gives them a purpose, and helps drain that excess energy that the dog has, okay? So that for me is your fundamental lead work principles. If you do have a high energy dog, if you do have a nervous dog, if you do have an excited dog, then obviously there's a lot more that you can do when we look at things like the way that you hold the lead, that timings, the direction, long line work, helping your dog relax, traveling and migrating states, or what we'd call pack drive. Okay, there's loads of other principles that come into getting your dog to relax, getting your dog to engage with you, settle down on the walk. Okay, but this is just one of those fundamental things that I often see skipped over. Hope that makes sense. Hope that helps you in your problem solving when it comes to your lead work. Okay, guys? Thanks very much.